What role do you think AI has and or should have in the society?
Look, at the end of the day, a lot depends on what societies we are really talking about, because it is one of
Let's
those.
talk about the Western civilization for start. You know,
A lot of modern Western civilization is heavily predicated on the idea of, like, essentially, philosophies of Kant and Spinoza and similar philosophers, where there is a very strong preponderance on material prosperity and the material world. And normally, in that kind of a setting where the individual is seen as the front and center of everything, or rather the front and center of the social contract that you have with society, something like a disruptive technology like artificial intelligence or similar, particularly in the context of these technologies causing large scale displacement of jobs and employment and increasingly shaping how society perceives and thinks. I would think that you are really looking at trying to have AI systems as assistive technologies. You are really looking at trying to have these systems as being creators of new forms of like creative output and new forms of like say productive enablement of the individual. And you're really looking at mitigating some of the more um, sort of like surface level harms that algorithms might cause in terms of things like misinformation, etc. Because when you're talking about essentially an individual centered society or a society that predicates significantly on individual reasoning, you do not want that idea of reason to be contaminated, or that idea of free will to be contaminated by external stimuli without having appropriate checks and balances on it. And therefore, like
yes,
the
but again, there's the question that if your whole worldview can be so easily influenced by AI, it probably isn't that stable and foundational in the first place.
that is true. But the thing is that we have to appreciate that, particularly the way Western societies have been shaped with so much of empowerment of the individual and individual will, it kind of like takes for granted the role of the the surrounding in shaping such worldview and shaping such will. And as such, if you have algorithmic interventions to the surrounding itself without appropriate checks and balances, then you do not really bring the individual to the state where their foundational um, sort of ethos is sufficiently strong enough. And as such, like, manipulation is only a matter of time that way. I mean, we
Yeah.
can look at it from another lens, actually. Like, you can look at it from a more positive lens. I mean, we are talking about a lot of applications of AI today that can have significant efficiency gains in things ranging from healthcare to security to, you know, say, for example, like, today you can have much more expedited like healthcare screenings. You can have much more expedited social media delivery. You can have like more efficient e-commerce delivery and optimization of like different freight routes and things like that. All of those are like, great benefits of technologies in a manner that would have looked like absolute science fiction, to let's say the generation above us. All of those are fantastic gains. And at that point, like since the more pecuniary and sundry gains to society have been thought about and are already very clear, the question is how you preserve those gains without like, letting them compromise on the sustainability of the society itself. And
What's
that is,
your answer? How?
well, well, look, I mean, at the end of the day, the question to be asked is that when you are having kind of like, particular kinds of technological transformations, and that too at such a short notice as we see today, to what extent are the custodians of the societies where such transformations being affected cognizant of the opinions and the thoughts and the requirements of the members of those very societies? In a sense, if you were to look at the social organization, let's say in the West, when you have essentially individuals coming together and forming the society as we know it, and you have elected representatives as de facto custodians of that society, it is incumbent upon members of both, the people who are essentially the elected representatives, let's say, or I mean, the equivalent would be the patricians of ancient Rome versus the plebeians, and essentially members of the society to be very cognizant of the impact of the technological transformation they are bringing in, and use the mechanics of the state that they have at their disposal, things like legislative control, things like selective encouragement, or things like allowing for the right amount of innovation. All of that, are tools available at the disposal to chart the course of the technological adoption in a manner it doesn't cause large scale disruption that just has a runaway reaction.
Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. So let's simplify for a moment. How about the question everybody's mom has? Will AI replace our jobs?
A lot of the jobs, yes. Classic
Okay.
example.
What are going to be the first job that get replaced?
Well, I mean, we saw that with ChatGPT, a lot of the copywriting jobs disappeared overnight. And we actually saw this on a lot of freelancing platforms. You had a very steep decline in a lot of these, copywriting and proofreading jobs overnight. So, as such, like we did see very strong examples of particular kinds of employment being susceptible at a moment's notice. So, I would think that any job that does not require, you know, engaging in the creative side of your mind or engaging with other humans or kind of like modulating the uniquely human ability of flexibly cooperating in large numbers, any of those jobs that do not require these three things are susceptible to disruption.
But again, in creativity, you see AI making unbelievably good music, art, all that stuff, which is a creative work.
Yeah, but then again, like, algorithms can't really express the emotion behind the creativity, and that is where uniquely the history comes in, role of creativity comes in. It was never about the medium. I mean, honestly, you could create fantastic music even without AI using a lot of like, stuff like auto tuning, etc. that you had back in the day. You had a lot of software that you could actually create a lot of music even without current algorithms. But it was always the artist and the that artistic insight and that artistic, ethos that actually made music special. So that is why creativity, because it kind of transcends the mechanistic aspect of the production of that creative output, that is why it will actually survive any scourge of AI adoption.
But again, there is a concern of mine that perhaps we're becoming too dependent on AI because I see it all the time in university, from friends, from even teachers. Teachers use AI to grade papers that students used AI to write. Like it's very funny. Do you think we're becoming too dependent? Maybe.
At the end of the day, we are really good at becoming dependent on new exciting technology really fast. Like for no reason, people got dependent on a bloody iPhone, like since 2007. So that's the human condition to get dependent on technology for no reason. I'm very sure if we had enough archaeological excavations, you'd find stories of some of the ancient Greeks becoming too dependent on Antikythera and teachers and students complaining about it. And a funny example here, I'll give you an example. So when I went for my undergrad in India, till about second year of undergrad, we were not allowed to use calculators in our exams. We had to, hand calculate everything. Whereas it would seem logical that, using calculators is such an efficiency gain. So that debate is always, to what extent should you do things from first principles and to what age and to what level of formation of your mind versus actually relying on technical tools that aid the efficiency of the process, like, calculators or ChatGPT or whatever.
Yeah, yeah.
And that is a debate that doesn't really have a very clear answer. And that's a debate that can go on till the end of time.
I mean, we do see some lines being drawn in the way that if somebody uses Google Maps all the time and doesn't have any
They lose a sense of
navigation, his hippocampus is gonna
yeah.
become atrophied like at some point.
No, what
But
worries like what worries me is this: like if you do get too dependent on easy solutions, or if you use technologies that are meant to assist you all the time. Say, for example, if you can't string a sentence together or write a long paragraph without using ChatGPT, it kind of has far-reaching implications beyond that activity itself. Because we do know there is a reliable amount of research now that things like being mentally agile with mathematical calculations or with learning more languages or being able to you know write stories, etc., that has far reaching implications towards warding off things like dementia and all of that. And today we are creating an entire generation where they can't string a sentence together using ChatGPT, so you're really creating essentially what can very well become a public health emergency in the next 50 years, and that is something that I would be more worried about.
yes, that is something very worrying for sure. Let's talk about something else in terms of AI and society, which is also worrying, which is the connection people start to form with AI models. You saw it in China, first of all, where you had kids use ChatGPT as their therapist or maybe even friend instead of real people. And then you have it in the more extreme form with AI girlfriends.
I mean, I should actually take a step back here. And so I'm from West Bengal in India, and the Bengali movie industry was quite famous for creating cult classics in the 60s and 70s. And there was a movie director by the name of Mridal Sen, and he was a more of a noir film director, like more of the postmodernist noir film director. And one of his most acclaimed movies is about a man who fell in love with his car. So, and the title of the movie, when you translate it, literally translates into "not a machine." So, essentially, this idea of forming emotional connection. Once again, the question to be asked: Why do I have to form an emotional connection only with humans? So that's also a question that there isn't exactly a very strong philosophical answer for. What worries me is this, and this is something I talked about last year in a lecture as well. A lot of the reason why generative models are being used as therapists, for example, in China, is and also in India for that matter, is because in a lot of these cultures it's deeply a taboo to talk about mental health.
Yeah, stigmatized. Yeah. Yeah.
So much so that you don't really have the adequate vocabulary in a lot of languages to talk about how you're feeling. And given the prospect of anonymity and individual one-to-one conversation that a lot of these artificial agents provide, they become the go-to choices. For a lot of people for whom navigating social cues is a significant challenge, and there isn't exactly a lot of social incentive to form those human connections, there is a lot of social cost essentially for them to try and be themselves in the outer world. These artificial agents become a refuge. And as such, like you have essentially the emergence of AI girlfriends or boyfriends, you have essentially AI therapists and whatnot. And this, I think, is a ticking time bomb. And a lot of, sort of governments and leaders of societies, etc., need to take a much closer look to this and ask a serious question that in their quest for empowering the individual, have they actually caused a runaway reaction of undermining the basic fundamentals of self-organized societies where you can't have individuals simply interacting with uh, a screen essentially in front of them and not really interact with the outer world outside. So that's a question that needs to be asked.
Yeah, I mean, there is a very, very quick transformation in society happening. It first was introduced by pornography, I would say, when if you take a step back and look at it, the most popular, richest king in history could have maybe five, six, 100 wives. The average 15-year-old today can see more naked women within 2 minutes than the richest king in history. But now you have the AI girlfriends topic being introduced. It is very worrying from a psychology standpoint because somebody.
Like you are actively disincentivizing interacting with the wider world outside beyond the digital world that you have created for yourself, because the digital world, like you talked about the pornography example, but even otherwise, like the average human today is so overstimulated by the digital world that their dopamine receptors are so conditioned to interacting with the digital that the natural looks boring. I mean,
Do you think
normally,
it's a ticking time bomb that is gonna explode?
like we do know that overstimulating on dopamine never did anyone particularly vast amount of good. Today you have a situation where people do not want to go on a hike in the mountains. They would rather sit in front of the screen and endlessly scroll their social media, and
Yeah.
that I think is a good thing overall. I mean, like overstimulating dopamine comes with serious mental health issues, and we have enough research today to actually attest to that.
Yeah. Okay. So let's take it from a little bit more philosophical standpoint. I I really like philosophy. In this case, I can't help my mind but to go to Plato's. Like for watchers and listeners who aren't familiar, Plato's cave was a theory introduced by Plato, where in the cave the prisoners saw other people only from their shadows, and they could only understand the world based on the shadows they saw, and not the actual people.